In just 47 seconds, $127.26 million in federal housing grants vanished from Seattle's affordable housing database. Zohran Mamdani didn't adjust his glasses or wait for the committee moderator. He lifted a manila folder, tapped the red tab labeled Murray Amendment 4B, and began to read aloud. Cameras leaned forward instinctively. The Senate committee chamber froze completely. What did the young assemblyman from Queens expose that made the most powerful housing advocate in Washington stop smiling and start calculating her next move? March 15, 2024, 2:47 p.m. The Hart Senate Office Building's Committee Room 2016 buzzed with the usual pre-hearing energy. Senators shuffled through briefing books, aides whispered final talking points, and C-SPAN cameras adjusted their angles for optimal coverage. This was supposed to be a routine hearing on the National Housing Preservation Act, Senator Patty Murray's flagship legislation aimed at protecting affordable housing across America. Murray, the respected Democrat from Washington state, had spent months crafting this bill as her legacy piece, something that would cement her reputation as the Senate's foremost housing champion. Zohran Mamdani walked in, like a tenant organizer, who had memorized every broken promise ever made to working families. At 33, the New York State Assemblyman from Queens seemed out of place among the mahogany panels and marble columns of federal power. His navy suit was pressed but not tailored, his tie slightly askew from the metro ride, and his leather portfolio showed the wear of someone who actually carried his own documents. Behind wire-rimmed glasses, his eyes scanned the room with the methodical precision of someone who had spent years tracking money that was supposed to help the poor but somehow ended up elsewhere. The weight of his research sat heavy in his portfolio. 3 sleepless nights had yielded a paper trail that connected dots no one was supposed to connect. Bank routing numbers, shell company registrations, property deed transfers, all public information, but buried across dozens of agencies and databases. His fingers unconsciously tapped against the folder containing what he privately called the smoking gun, a series of emails between Murray's chief of staff and Cascade Development executives, obtained through a FOIA request that had taken 8 months to fulfill. Senator Patty Murray sat like a career politician, carved in institutional authority. At 74, she commanded respect through 3 decades in the Senate. Her silver hair perfectly styled, her navy blazer adorned with a small American flag pin that caught the overhead lights. Her aide, a young man in an expensive suit, leaned close to whisper something urgent, but Murray's expression remained serene, confident. She had weathered countless hearings, countless challenges to her legislation. A state assemblyman from New York wasn't going to rattle her composure. Behind Murray, 2 more staffers monitored tablets showing real-time social media feeds and news alerts. One of them, a woman with prematurely gray hair, kept glancing nervously at Zohran. She had tried unsuccessfully to schedule a pre-hearing meeting with his office, ostensibly for productive dialogue, but really to gauge what he knew. His staff's polite deflections had left Murray's team operating blind, a position they weren't accustomed to. But Zohran had spent the previous 72 hours doing something Senator Murray's staff hadn't anticipated. While her team prepared traditional talking points about housing shortages and community development, Zohran had been following money trails, using New York's Freedom of Information Act as a template. He had requested parallel documentation from federal agencies about Murray's previous housing initiatives. What he discovered hidden in budget appendices and contract amendments would transform this routine hearing into a political earthquake. The committee chairman, Senator Brown from Ohio, called the session to order. We're here today to examine SR 127, the National Housing Preservation Act, authored by our distinguished colleague from Washington, Senator Murray. You have the floor for opening remarks. Murray stood gracefully, her voice carrying the warm authority of someone who genuinely believed in her cause. Thank you, Chairman Brown. For too many families across America, safe and affordable housing remains just out of reach. The National Housing Preservation Act represents our commitment to changing that reality. This legislation will direct $3.2 billion over 5 years to preserve existing affordable housing and create pathways to homeownership for working families. She gestured toward charts prepared by her staff, displaying statistics about housing costs and family displacement. We've seen tremendous success in my home state of Washington, where innovative public-private partnerships have leveraged federal dollars to create lasting solutions. She paused, scanning the room with practiced confidence. Critics may question whether federal investment in housing truly works. I invite them to look at Seattle, where our pilot programs have already helped thousands of families stay in their homes and build generational wealth. The data speaks for itself. Zohran's pen stopped moving across his notepad. The data. Murray had just opened the door he needed. He glanced at the press gallery, noting reporters from The Intercept, ProPublica, and the New York Times publications that understood the difference between surface-level politics and systematic corruption. After 40 minutes of routine questions about implementation timelines and administrative oversight, Chairman Brown announced, "We'll now hear from invited witnesses. Our first witness is New York State Assemblyman Zohran Mamdani, representing the 36th District in Queens." Zohran approached the witness table with deliberate calm. His footsteps echoed in the suddenly quiet chamber. He placed his portfolio on the table, withdrew 3 manila folders, and arranged them in a precise line. The first was labeled Murray Amendment 4 by. The second, Seattle Housing Authority Contracts 2019-2023. And the third, simply Follow the Money. Next to them, he placed a small digital recorder and a tablet loaded with bank transfer records. "Senator Murray," Zohran began, his voice clear and steady, "thank you for your decades of service on housing issues. I'd like to ask about the Seattle pilot programs you mentioned." Murray leaned forward slightly, sensing this wasn't a typical witness question. "Certainly, Assemblyman, our Seattle initiatives have been tremendously successful. Specifically," Zohran continued, opening the first folder, "can you explain what happened to the $127.6 million in federal housing grants that were allocated to Seattle between 2019 and 2022 under your Housing Innovation Amendment?" The room's energy shifted instantly. Murray's aide grabbed his phone, fingers flying across the screen. C-SPAN camera zoomed in tighter. Even the stenographer looked up from her machine. In the press gallery, laptops opened and phones emerged as reporters sensed blood in the water. Murray's smile remained, but her eyes hardened slightly. Those funds were distributed according to established federal guidelines to qualified housing organizations throughout the Seattle metropolitan area. Zohran nodded, flipping to a specific page in his folder. "I'm sure they were distributed, Senator, but here's what troubles me." He lifted a document, holding it so the cameras could see the official letterhead. "This is a contract amendment from the Seattle Housing Authority, dated July 15, 2021. It shows $47.3 million being transferred to something called the Pacific Northwest Housing Innovation Consortium." Murray's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Her chief of staff, sitting directly behind her, leaned forward and scribbled something on a notepad, sliding it toward her. She glanced at it briefly before responding. "Community partnerships are essential for effective housing policy." "Absolutely," Zohran agreed, his tone remaining respectful but gaining an edge. "So I'm sure you can help us understand why this consortium's board of directors includes 3 executives from Cascade Development Group, the same company that donated $45,000 to your 2022 re-election campaign through various PACs." The chamber fell silent except for the hum of recording equipment. Murray's aide was now typing furiously on his laptop, probably drafting damage control statements. Senator Brown shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Republican senators exchanged knowing glances. They had been looking for exactly this kind of Democratic scandal to balance the scales. This was no longer a policy discussion. It had become an investigation. Murray's voice remained steady, but stress lines appeared around her eyes. Her flag pin caught the light, as her chest rose and fell with controlled breathing. "Campaign finance laws strictly regulate all donations to my committee. I resent any implication of impropriety." Zohran opened his second folder, without breaking eye contact. "I'm not making implications, Senator. I'm reading contracts." He pulled out another document, this one marked with multiple colored tabs. "Seattle Housing Authority Amendment 7-2. Dated September 3, 2021. Another $34.7 million, transferred to Pacific Northwest Housing Innovation Consortium for community revitalization planning. He looked up. Can you tell us how many actual housing units were built with this planning money? The question hung in the air like smoke. Murray's media consultant, watching from the back of the room, was already calculating the damage. This wasn't going to be contained with a simple press statement. Murray hesitated for the first time. Her aide leaned over, whispering urgently, but she waved him away with a gesture that betrayed her growing frustration. Housing development is a complex, multi-phase process that requires extensive planning and community input. Of course it does, Zohran said, flipping to a page marked with yellow highlighter, which is why I was surprised to learn from Cascade Development's own SEC filings that they used $41.2 million in consulting fees, paid directly from these federal housing grants, to purchase 3 luxury properties in Bellevue, properties that now serve as corporate retreats, rather than affordable housing. The explosion of whispers from the gallery forced Chairman Brown to bang his gavel 3 times. Order. Order in the chamber. But the damage was done. In the press section, reporters were already filing preliminary stories. Social media managers for advocacy organizations began crafting inflammatory tweets. Murray's face had drained of color, making her carefully applied makeup stand out starkly against pale skin. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water glass. Those are serious accusations based on incomplete information taken out of context. Zohran was already reaching for his 3rd folder. Let's add some context then. He went to a stack of high-resolution photographs and held up the first one. A sprawling waterfront estate with manicured gardens and a private dock. This is 247 Bellevue Way Northeast, purchased by Cascade Development in October 2021 for $114.3 million. The purchase was funded entirely through the Pacific Northwest Housing Innovation Consortium. He held up a second photo showing the same property's transformed interior. This is the property today, a corporate conference center, charging $3,000 per night for executive retreats. The cameras captured every detail. Murray's knuckles white as she gripped her water glass, her aide frantically texting with both hands. Senators on both sides of the aisle leaning forward with undisguised shock. In the gallery, housing advocates who had traveled to Washington to support Murray's legislation sat in stunned silence. But Zohran wasn't finished. He pulled out his tablet and began reading from bank records. Cascade Development Group received $18.7 million on August 3, 2021. Wells Fargo, routing number 12-10248. Account ending in 4571. On August 5, 2 days later, the same amount minus a $45,000 processing fee was transferred to purchase escrow for the Bellevue property. Murray's chief of staff stood abruptly and walked toward the exit, phone already pressed to his ear. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Even her own team was abandoning ship. Senator Murray, you've spent this hearing talking about helping working families build generational wealth. Can you explain how $27.6 million in federal housing money built generational wealth for Cascade Development executives, while over 4,000 Seattle families remain on affordable housing waiting lists? The silence stretched for exactly 8 seconds, long enough for every camera in the room to capture Murray's struggle to formulate a response. Her media training had prepared her for tough questions, but not for this level of documented evidence. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its earlier authority. The housing crisis requires innovative public-private partnerships. Not every investment yields immediate visible results. Zohran closed his folders and leaned back, his mission accomplished. Senator, with respect, these weren't investments in housing. According to the documents I've reviewed, all obtained through public records requests. This appears to be a sophisticated system for converting federal housing grants into private real estate assets for your campaign donors. Chairman Brown intervened before Murray could respond. I think we need to take a brief recess. No, Murray interrupted, her composure finally cracking completely. Her voice rose above its usual measured tone. I won't have my integrity questioned by someone who doesn't understand the complexities of federal housing policy. The outburst only made things worse. Cameras zoomed in on her flushed face, capturing raw emotion that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Zohran remained calm, his voice steady and respectful. Then help me understand, Senator. Help this committee understand how luxury corporate retreats advance your National Housing Preservation Act's goal of keeping families in their homes. For the first time in her 30-year Senate career, Patty Murray sat in front of cameras without a ready answer. The woman who had built her reputation as a champion of working families found herself defending a system that had enriched developers at the expense of the very people she claimed to serve. The hearing's aftermath unfolded with devastating speed. Within 30 minutes, Murray housing scandal was trending nationwide on Twitter. CNN interrupted regular programming to replay Zohran's most damning revelations. Fox News booked him for a primetime interview. Progressive organizations that had long supported Murray began issuing carefully worded statements calling for full transparency and accountability. But the real earthquake happened in Seattle. Local housing advocates who had praised Murray's leadership for decades found themselves poring over the very contracts Zohran had exposed. Tenant organizations demanded investigations. Editorial boards that had endorsed Murray in 2022 published scathing columns about the betrayal of public trust. Most devastating of all, the families still waiting for affordable housing began telling their stories. Maria Gonzalez, a single mother who had been on Seattle's housing waitlist for 6 years, told King TV, "While my kids shared a bedroom in our cramped apartment, Senator Murray's donors were buying mansions with our tax money. How is that fighting for working families?" 3 days after the hearing, Murray's office released a statement announcing she was indefinitely postponing the National Housing Preservation Act to address concerns about implementation standards. Political observers recognized it as the death knell for legislation that had consumed 2 years of Murray's political capital. Zohran, meanwhile, found himself transformed from a local Queens activist into a national symbol of accountability. His methodical exposure of Murray's housing deals had demonstrated something many progressive voters had long suspected, that even well-meaning Democrats could be captured by the same systems of legalized corruption they claimed to oppose. The broader implications extended far beyond one senator's political troubles. Zohran had proven that meticulous research, strategic document requests, and moral courage could still puncture Washington's bubble of institutional protection. In an era when political scandals often disappeared within news cycles, he had created a story with staying power because it connected abstract policy failures to concrete human suffering. As investigations into Murray's housing deals expanded, other senators began quietly reviewing their own public-private partnerships with new scrutiny. The Pacific Northwest Housing Innovation Consortium dissolved within weeks, its executives pleading ignorance about the source of their funding. Cascade Development faced federal investigations in 3 states. For Zohran, the victory validated his belief that progressive politics required more than good intentions. It demanded relentless accountability, even when targeting allies. Standing in his Queens District office weeks later, surrounded by thank-you letters from housing advocates nationwide, he reflected on how 47 seconds of courage had exposed years of systematic betrayal. Sometimes the strongest weapon isn't a subpoena or a press conference. It's truth, documented and revealed at exactly the right moment. What happens when politicians who built careers helping people are exposed for helping themselves instead? If progressivism can't survive transparency, was it ever really progressive? In Zohran's case, accountability didn't just end a career. It began a movement. How can I help you today?